And now we're live.
Hello, hello. So, welcome to Fireside Chat number 53. We have a special guest with us. So, just some quick introductions. I am Mash. I'm one of the founders for Codurance. I'm joined here by regular Jose, who is the MD for Spain. And our special guest for today is Steve Lydford. He is the COO for Codurance UK. Sandro has more important and better things to do today than talk to us, but I'm sure he is going to be missed. So, as usual, the whole concept of the fireside chat is that we end up after work chatting to each other over a drink or two, and usually it's related to work and full of our opinions, often uninformed opinions that we like to pass on as facts. But and then with this, and it actually helps us learn on a more serious note. And we thought, well, why not start recording and streaming this so that other people can also join in on the conversation, or at the very least listen. So you can subscribe to our YouTube Fireside channel, so it will give you a notification when we are on next, and join us live as well and ask questions, because that enriches the conversation a lot. And thank you always to some of our regulars who are on there already, right? So today's topic is speeding up software delivery. So what are the things that slow it down, and what are the things that actually can help speed it up? And before we even talk about speeding software delivery, maybe we can scope this. So who's going to start with defining what we mean by software delivery, at least for this conversation?
Steve, do you want to go?
Yeah, go for it. I was looking for the mute button. I'm not used to this thing. Yeah, I guess for this, I guess we kind of we could talk about kind of working well-crafted software in the hands of customers, right? So working good quality working software into production. That I guess that gives us a scope that provides value, because there's no there are many ways to speed up software if we never wanted to go live. But yeah, I guess for this, working software in the hands of customers, so working deployed software.
Yeah.
All right. And everything is software delivery, as in the whole process from inception to the hands of the customer. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
So yeah. So first, why speed it up? No, that's the thing. And a lot of the times, I think it would be interesting to make the distinction here that we're not only about only talking about putting software out, but also good software, right? So not, let's say, not sacrificing quality and all of these things,
Yes.
no, just to finish the job, so to speak. But how to, without doing that kind of sacrifice, can you speed it up? No? And I think a lot is sacrificed in the altar of speed, no, or efficiency in some cases, no, and in general, the main tendency is to work more. No, it's like, oh, we need to get this shipped, by Friday. Then everyone's like doing overtime, but that may not necessarily be the best thing, right? Like, in order to speed up, at least I'm talking about my experience now, is you need to do things differently, not more of the same, no. And I think that's important.
Well, playing devil's advocate, if you
Mm-hmm.
work more, you might, produce more code, and you
Mm-hmm.
might get more features out. I mean, almost everyone at least does the whole kind of concept of the crunch time when the release is due. So it must have some benefit if so many people are doing it.
Yeah, but is that speeding up your software delivery, or is that just putting more effort into your software delivery? Therefore, you get more done. That's
Hmm.
that's the thing, because you're working more,
Yeah.
right? So for me, speeding up would mean, would mean maintaining, your
Effort.
your effort, yeah, and getting
More.
either the same done in a shorter amount of time, no, or more in the same amount of time, no, which
This
is
is the
the
sustainable
same.
pace thing, right? From XP.
Mhm.
A crunch comes now and again. We just kind of accept it, and it's not unique to software development. But that shouldn't be a strategy, right?
Yeah.
That should be a remediation, not. It should be
Mhm.
something you plan in.
So,
Because also it addresses, a symptom, right? Oh, we're not getting to the delivery. Oh, let's put on more effort, no, in order to get to that deadline or whatever. But you're kind of not dealing with the underlying problems that got you there, right? Like whatever is making you miss that deadline, yeah, you're not addressing. You're trying to get to the deadline, so you're treating the symptom of missing out on the deadline, but you're not treating what is causing that, right?
Mhm.
it can make it even worse, in fact, right? So because you earlier you qualified, we're not just talking about delivering faster, but delivering quality software faster. Do we have to make that qualification? Does it mean, so this is an interesting question then. Can we sustainably ship shit but quickly without it kind of coming back at us?
Well, yeah, good point. No, right? Because you're this is where you get to start to talk about things like tech debt and the ability to kind of make easy changes without affecting other parts of the software and things like that. And if you just deliver crap forever, eventually, and probably not after not very long, it will come and bite you, right? And it will end up slowing you down.
Yeah.
I think we need to qualify this further, because some cases come to mind where yes, you could do that and it's not gonna bite you in the ass, right? Like if it's a throwaway thing, like we just need
Mhm.
this for this particular thing, like you just do it, it works for whatever brief amount of time you need it to work, and then you can replace it or do something else. And also when you're working with a product, something along the lines of a WordPress that needs some little customization or whatever, and then you're churning out those types of websites, let's say,
Mhm.
that would also it wouldn't be such a big problem, right? Because the criteria, no, that you're using, or the future proofness, no, of that, or even the stability of the system itself, you're not building it from scratch. You're basically you know working on top of something that is quite stable, no, would help. But I guess that we are thinking, or most of us are thinking, no, this custom made software, no, or this system that you're building yourself that needs to last for a very long time, you're building your business on top of, and that kind of stuff, no.
And needs to change, right?
Yeah,
As the
and
business
needs to change, as opposed to yeah
Yeah. So basically software that's evolving alongside your business, right?
Hmm.
Mhm.
So let's move on to then what is it that usually slows down delivery? So before we start talk about speeding it up, what are the factors that are slowing it down?
Not typing.
Yeah.
I think
No,
it's
not typing.
no. I mean, it's
Not typing fast enough.
Because you're not
Everyone needs
typing
to.
fast enough.
Exactly.
but I remember, maybe a few years ago, there was a whole bunch of people, buying faster keyboards and learning to touch type and all this kind of stuff. But I was being a bit flippant with not typing. But in my experience, it's very rarely that people are not writing the code quick enough, right? There's a massive big value stream, like Jose said, right from someone having an idea to it getting in production, and very rarely I've seen it be like that people are not writing the code fast enough, right? There are lots of other areas that I would probably go to first.
Even, I mean, you can take it further, and it's often something that is said in against pair programming, that there's not enough hands-on keyboards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Same thing, isn't it? You can take it to not typing enough, basically. So that's
Yeah.
basically they say same thing. People are not typing enough keys, and so we are slow, right? That's also part of it.
You
Yeah.
know, but there is some truth to it, no? And if you start at the beginning of the whole thing, right? Like when you're trying to get that idea of what you need to build, a lot of the times, no, just to follow on what Steve was saying, you know, maybe the development time, we're focusing on optimizing the development time, but we took 3 months before we even got to that point where where we're actually writing the feature, no? And out of those 3 months, it's not like we were intensively working on defining the feature. No, it was maybe one meeting, then a week later another one, then maybe
Wait for a
someone did
decision
some
from
work, and
someone.
then
Yeah.
someone's waiting for something to get approved or stuff like it. So there's a lot of uh, poor flow efficiency. That percentage of time that the work is actually being done versus the time that is waiting,
Mhm.
is quite high, especially on the definition stages, no. And a lot of the times we're talking about how do we make the development people typing no more faster, right? So that's one of the requirements gathering, defining, ideation, all of this stuff is tends to take a very long time, and there tends to be a lot of waste around that, right? I think one of the reasons is that people tend to think that it needs to be perfect in order for you to be able to start, no. And this is that takes a lot of effort, no, trying to get every screen perfect, and then we can start development, no. And this may not be the case if you're working more in a more agile way of working, where you already have UX and design integrated into your workflow. But a lot of companies that are doing agile for the software development aspect, or let's say the code writing aspect, they still follow a very waterfall approach to all of the ideation aspects of the product, no.
Mhm.
Hmm.
You mentioned lots of waiting time there, right? Which is one of the things that you would do in that kind of lean product development flow, right? Where any time in spent in queues is waste, and that's what you would try and cut down. And I think there's a lot of often, again in my experience, which is limited, or there's an awful lot of waste in that left hand side before it even gets to the development team of just kind of waiting for decisions and exactly as you said, one because it's trying to get perfect, and two because it's trying to be the whole thing.
Hmm.
Rather than the kind of ideation, product design, requirements gathering can also be done iteratively.
So this is actually quite interesting, but I think we are maybe referring to certain things that people may not be aware of. So maybe worth setting some context uh, around this, like the what we're talking about queues. So I guess we're talking about value streams. We are talking about the
Release
site.
management, whether you do big band releases or you're constantly
Mhm.
pushing stuff
So
out and iterating on it.
yeah. So just to kind of set a bit of scene, what we are talking about is in lean specifically that there is this idea of a value stream, and you got various stages, so all the way from kind of inception of an idea, or some feedback that results in something appearing in the backlog, as it were, and it needs to go through refinement, or maybe you have a kind of ideation process that goes before that, and that brings something in that then needs to be refined, then it needs to be turned into a backlog. Maybe you need to have screens, you need to have a lot of the analysis works and UX UI work that often happens earlier on, and that turns into a backlog with stories and so on, and eventually it comes into the hands of the developers, who then build it, and then testers and so on. So there is this whole kind of different, I would say, could be considered distinct stages of software development, all the way from an idea or
Well,
some kind of
I
feedback to.
more than stages, I would say they're more like activities. No, activities that you need to do in order to deliver that value. No, from idea or detecting the need all the way to fulfilling the need. What
Mhm.
are all the things that need to be done
The
in
activities.
order for
Mhm.
Yeah,
to get all the way there?
yeah.
Most of the time, you
That's
can
that.
split those in stages as well. No, but
Yeah,
but thinking of it not as in stages that need to happen, but activities and how some of those activities are non-value adding
yeah.
activities. No,
But also,
is
also like how much you split them down into stages and how big those stages are,
mm,
right? Because I think it is useful to think of them activities, because then you're not implying that they have to be stages, because they don't have to be stages. And I think there's some of the things that you were talking about queues there, Steve, which is actually related to handover, because a queue exists in between two stages.
Mhm.
And handover, if it has to be done explicitly, and the more cumbersome and the bigger it's in scope it is, the more ceremony that has to sit behind it, and also the more out of sync it can get with the downstream stages, which means that the queues can build up. You then start needing queues in the middle, right?
Mhm.
And
mm,
so that's another aspect of it, is that the number of stages, in a way, is also a form of a or an area where things can slow down, because you the if you if the, all the activities were integrated in a way that they're seamless, there's no stages or handover between them, then you stop talking about queues and you start talking about this ultimate flow of value from left to right.
You're right, and I think that where there is handover, I think the quality of the thing that's being handed over has a massive effect on the on that handover. So if you think there's something simple like I don't know, writing a user story, acceptance criteria, something ready for development to go to sprint planning. Right?
Mhm.
If that's extremely well written, sprint planning will be painless. If that thing is very badly written or incomplete from the previous stage, then sprint planning can be the, you know, 6 hour nightmare that we've all seen at some point in our career. Right. The same at the other end when we maybe go out to some sort of UAT, for example. Right, if the output from the development and stage is poor, then UAT, that handover is going to be very painful as well. So
Mhm.
it's the quality at each stage as well as the just time waiting for events to occur.
Mhm.
there's another aspect that you mentioned briefly with the queuing, and I think it's a good time to bring it in, which is this whole idea of theory of constraints, right? Like in that value chain or that chain of activities that need to happen, the output or how well the system is able to achieve its objective, no, or to that throughput of value is defined by a very small number of constraints, in general one or two, right, that are kind of limiting how everything else
Mhm.
works, no. And when you are finding that let's say that you're getting a queue between these stages or whatever, what it means is that you found where your limiting constraint is, no, like if things are piling up, I don't know, in QA, right, then you have a problem there, right, like you have a constraint that is not letting the flow move
Mhm.
forward, right, and then it needs to be addressed somehow, right.
And actually, it goes further than that to say that work spent on anything other than the most limiting constraint is waste.
Mhm.
Right. So there's no point
although
in making
Although
another
that
discipline.
theory has a lot of detractors, the theory
Well,
of
yeah.
constraint, because working on just the most limiting thing at a time, only prioritizing that and so on, it's considered to be somewhat of an extreme, right? Nowadays,
Mhm.
anyway. I think when the book The Goal, by the way, kind of talks about it in a very entertaining way. But yeah, it describes that theory of constraints and how actually looking at certain things actually really helps you eliminate those bottlenecks, and so that then you can elevate and then eliminate type thing, right? And then you can so you, I think there is a body of kind of argument around that as well. But in in my view, at least at kind of the basic concept, is still very valuable.
Yeah, it allows you to think of the system, in this case the development process, no, in a different way, so trying to figure out where are those constraints, what is it that is limiting the output, no. Also, in order for this to kind of work out, yeah, some methodologies like Kanban, for instance, introduce stability in the system by introducing constraints
Mm-hmm.
themselves, right? Like things like limiting the work in progress,
Mm-hmm.
which is often, the switching context and all of these things are often a source of waste. No, you suddenly have, I don't know, you're working on 3 different features at the same time. You're very busy. Everyone is very busy, but nothing gets delivered, right? And that context switching, that lack of focus, and so on, is part of what is causing that, right? So some
Yeah.
methodologies like Kanban try to introduce that stability by artificially creating that limit, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can find a balance between how much stuff you have in, in working you're working on at the same time, no, and how much the system can produce, right, and
It,
how long it takes to produce as well,
it's
right?
that old the adage of stop starting and start finishing.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of questions actually, and I think
Yeah, I
they're
was about to-
important that we discuss. Two actually follow-ups from Emmanuel. How would you measure the speed of your software delivery at a company level, and when do you start to measure the speed of delivery from the discovery and so on? So I think the first question is kind of very pertinent. Is like, and maybe we'll hopefully frame our discussion as well. How do you measure uh, the speed of delivery then?
It's interesting, isn't it? You can measure the time taken, right, quite easily through that value stream we said, from the initial idea to work in software in production. You can measure the time of that and each stage within it, but that doesn't necessarily measure value. That measures, some code going out, whether it maybe there are other metrics that you could use to measure not only the time, that the time to create value. And I don't think just measuring time necessarily gives you that.
Yeah, it's actually a very good point. Although, and maybe we want to, because you can always take it forward to like, okay, measuring impact, and that is certainly, that needs to be something that needs to be done, and that is the real measure of any software. But I think how you measure what the impact is and how you measure that would change according to your context. So you can't generalize and discuss that too much. I mean, one can always say you're working for a business and its profits and its revenues and so on. Ultimately, the goal kind of talks about that as well. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, we can't take it down to that level, because, that is different for every context.
Yeah, but he's also not asking about the value, right? Like, he's asking about the speed of of delivery, right? So
Yeah.
what is the unit that you are measuring? Is it a user story, like delivery of what? And what's the size of your unit of, value or software? Is it a commit, right? Like, how long does this, commit take to be in production? No. Or is it a user story? Or, what that the granularity
Is
is important as well.
isn't it isn't it something, I mean, like, if you really think about the definition of a user story, right, it's meant to be something that is independently deployable, that has value to the user, to the end customer, right? So I mean, we of course take that and take it even further
But
down. We
again,
never very rarely do that, right? Because but
no,
that's
but
what he
his
was.
question, was, right, a software delivery, right? Like, yes, hands of the customer, it's put in production. It may not be adding as much value as we expect, because the feature is not turned on or whatever, right? But it's about,
If it's not turned on, it's not
whatever.
delivered. That's the way I see it. I think
I
that
agree.
the way we can constrain, like, user stories, or definition of it, doesn't talk about like feature flags. It talks about something that is in the, like, you kind of a distinct piece of functionality that you build and deploy, and that can be used by the customer, whether that is something new as an enhancement, but it is deployed and can be used by the customer, right? So if you just kind of constrain it to that, then I think we can, then my personal view is that then you don't really need to worry about how big or small each individual story is. They can be quite wide ranging. It doesn't matter to my, in my view. What
I
matters is
disagree a
that,
bit. I disagree with that, because the size of the story actually creates batching, right? Like, because
Mhm.
you can split the story. You know, the bigger the story, the more chances there is that you can split that into individual parts that also add value, right? And those could be delivered, right? So
but
you are
that's what,
creating some sort of batching that will actually make it harder for you to have that constant flow of value, yeah,
but
because you're waiting for the whole thing to be finished.
but that's what I'm saying is that there is a theory that, you know, like all these questions are secondary, because if you are really thinking about this, the is it the cycle time or the what's
What,
the other one,
the lead time?
lead time or the cycle, in the lead time,
Like
right?
they're
From
the same. Lead time is just, the whole thing,
the whole
and
thing, I
cycle
mean the
time
whole
is
thing,
between different
between
points of
each,
the.
yeah. So I mean the lead time. If all you're looking at is the lead time, actually, and when you are looking at optimizing that or keeping it to a range, you will automatically start thinking around what the sizes of your stories should be. It's actually a secondary concern, because if you know, like a lot of people say, well, if your story is big, then you're batching a lot. But if you're batching a lot, your lead time is going to increase, right? So you end up just looking at the lead time, like how quickly can you take a story, let's say in this case, or a valuable thing from left to right, how quickly you can take it. Then you don't actually have to say, well, how big or small it needs to be, because actually that's a secondary concern. You, in order to keep that, well, that lead time low, you're gonna have to start thinking around reducing the size, so that you are
Yeah.
delivering incrementally and at the right level, right? I think that's often a lot of people talk about, like the size and so on, and it's actually just another secondary thing when you compare that to lead time itself.
Mhm. So
Bec-
this talks as well to one of the something that someone in the chat was saying around classes of service. Yeah, talking about Kanban and so on. uh, because you don't have, this is another aspect of speeding software delivery. You don't have to treat every user story or every unit of value, no, that you want to deliver the same way,
No.
right? And this is where things like expedites and standard work and fixed date and intangibles and this kind of stuff come in, right? And the to be fair, when people use classes of service and they're not, let's say, a mature Kanban team, or they're just doing some scrum ban or whatever people call it, yeah. It's just they usually make it as a way for someone, a manager or whatever, to to be able to streamline whatever it is
Exactly.
that they
Exa-
want to put through. You know?
I remember one client we had, they called it like cardboard, and then kind of like some kind of concrete and metal or something like this. They called it like, so, you know, I want this feature but cardboard quality. You know, it's like just do a cardboard, and then like make it concrete and make it metal, and it was everything cardboard. You know,
No, but
yeah.
it's the problem with classes of service, and I think, who was it talking about testing? You know,
it was
it was
fantastic.
asking about this. The problem with classes of service is that classes of service are not meant to be stable, right? And if you look at it, like something like technical debt, for instance, no, which is an intangible, like something that you want to get done, but not necessarily now, right? As time goes by, it quickly becomes an expedite kind of thing, like drop everything because we
Yeah.
can. No, so as time goes by, the classes of service should change for the items, and this is what I found a lot of the times, that people don't actually re-evaluate the class of service that they're doing for the work that they have in the backlog, or they're at the moment, no, that they're doing at the moment. And that in itself creates a problem, right? Because you may have important stuff that now becoming urgent and so on, that you're not addressing, right?
Yeah.
You're maybe giving priority to stuff that you put later in the backlog, no,
Yeah.
but you
Things.
you just qualified it as but the other thing that's at the bottom that used to be an intangible is now, has gone up as well, no, in
Exactly.
that.
And it kind of almost starts, you have to be very disciplined about that, because, you start then making those decisions, things that become expedited are urgent but not important. And if you do keep doing more and more of that, ultimately because if you there is, if you talk about flow within the concept of theory of constraints, or lean, uh, one thing that is the last thing you do or you want to do is create, is to pull, right? So
Mhm.
your processes or your value stream is so well aligned that you can pull features. So it's not like a backlog pushing things, but it's almost a customer pulling features, because everything is so well and streamlined. And then theoretically what you're doing is you're expediting everything in a way, right? So things are just moving so quickly, and things are not getting stuck in within the value stream, that then you have to add another kind of fast track through it, right? Usually, I mean, if I think about that kind of thing, you look at airport queues. You got the really slow queue, and then you pay a bit more and you got the fast track. Well, the fast track is
Or you're
also
right.
slowing the other ones down even more, right?
Or
Yeah.
you arrive late to your flight, a couple of minutes and then they open a different counter for people who are
And then you make a dash for it.
no, but that's true. I have a friend who used to do that. Like, he would, instead of being 2 hours ahead of time at the airport, like he
Yeah.
would he would get very very close, and they would just rush through the
Yeah,
whole
and just tell
thing
everyone
because
that, oh, my flight is
exactly, my
now,
flight is
so I
leaving, my
must
flight is
run. I
leaving, and,
must
and
run.
people would just let
Yeah, and
him.
piss everyone else off. But I think it's an important aspect. A lot of the times when you are looking at different ways of speeding things through the value stream, in a way you are still addressing a symptom, right? Because your value stream is not fast enough for everything to come through, and you're now adding new lines where everything has to drop. But even when everything has to drop, that is creating waste, because if, for example, there is work in progress, the same people are having to do that. There is not a completely new team just sitting there waiting for the expedited stuff to come through, right?
Well,
So
but
you
that's with expedite. There are other classes of service, like you can have, drop everything and jump and do this, right? Which is, I think, what you're referring to. But there is also, I don't remember the names of these. I did this very long, but there's also a, as soon as you finish what you're doing, the next thing that needs to be is this other thing. So you don't
Mhm.
have to drop what you're doing. You finish what you're doing, and then immediately after, the most important
oh, I
thing
see,
gets
the more the
gets done, right?
prioritization side of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there are different classes of service in that sense, right? Like, it's not just drop it, and
Yeah.
there are other elements which normally, for instance, like fixed date. Yeah,
Mhm.
they would have a date from which, you, they either start costing money, or they should be done by that date. So
Mhm.
normally what you would do is you would look at that type of work, see what the uh, what the distribution is for it, like what percentage, let's say, falls under what, right? Like, normally has kind of like a long tail distribution, yeah.
Mhm.
And then you would say, okay, if, I don't know, I want 80% certainty that I'm going to finish this on time. You look at that, look at the distribution they have. Okay, 80% is here. Yeah. So this is what? 7 days. So I need to start working on this 7 days before the date, the latest, if I want 80% certainty. If I want 100%, then you go all the way to the queue, no, and then like, okay, I need to start 100 days before the date, right? So that way you can choose at which point that becomes the next thing that you need to
I see. I see.
bring. And if you get it done sooner, that's great, no, but it will give you some idea of what you want to do, right? And then
Should
there's
we?
standard and all that stuff.
So should we talk a bit more, because I think we're still skirting above on the theory of constraints and that kind of thing. So let's talk a bit more about what are the things that really slow things down, right? And how you remediate them. So
Okay.
because we were talking kind of in abstracts at the moment.
Right. So let's start with the easy stuff. Yeah. Anything that is manual is error prone and is so if you can remove that from the equation and automate it, whether it's tests, deployment, all this stuff, if you can automate it, make it a repeatable, consistent process, no, that will already simplify your.
So yeah, and that's true 99% of the time. There are some things that could be automated, which are where that, for example, perhaps you have some tests that check that things are the right color and have got the right radius of corners on rectangles and things like that in your UI. That a QA can, a person can look at and say, yeah, that looks fine. Whereas and it matches exactly the UI design. Whereas writing tests for that would be really time consuming. Definitely doable, but very time consuming. So if those things are really important and they need to be run hundreds of times a day or tens of times a day, then it's definitely worth automating. But where it's just kind of a quick look before it goes out to make sure that we haven't left the default style on a button or something like that, I think that
more or less, I agree, because you had Golden Master, you had headless browsers, you like all of that stuff has become easier to
definitely true.
to automate
Definitely true.
as well. Eh?
It is easier to automate, but would you really want to automate it? Because I have examples
exactly
of those kind of tests really slowing everything down, basically.
No, I agree, right? Like it's just where do you want, what quality gates you want to have, no, in place, and how often do you want to have them, right? Like as well, because there's also a cost on running some of these quality gates, right? So you may have performance run on a nightly build basis, for instance, because it's a really expensive test to run or whatever, right? And things like this, right? So that definitely, there is a context for which some of these things you might decide not to do them every time that you're putting stuff out, no, or every but in general, automation would be a rule of thumb, right? Like if you want to get
it's about
things done,
you want to automate toil, right? It's basically something that you're repeating very, very often, and it's costing you time, and you're not even able to do it in a kind of a deterministic way because you don't know what you've done and what you haven't. Automating those things. But I think the important point is that sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that automating or test automation is just the right thing to do, full stop. It's not always the right thing to do, because sometimes those tests can be very brittle and can get in the way of delivery, as well as any manual task can.
So moving to another aspect that also slows things down, usually integration. I think that like if you have long-lived branches, that kind of stuff, and then you have to merge, and or you have a ton of pull requests that people are, there are basically you're pushing into people that are working now, that they have to drop what they're doing to look at the thing and so on. That also creates a lot of waste. So yeah, I tend to prefer more on the trunk-based feature flag kind of approach, where you're basically integrating all the time. No?
there is a whole body of kind of, or rather, there's a whole bunch of arguments on this, right? People, I think, like it kind of started here as well on our chat, which was, feature branches versus, and then someone said, but
Put
shortly
requests down,
feature
slow things down.
yeah, pull requests, slow things down. But someone said like short, but talk about short-lived feature branches, they are okay, and so on. And in fact, even Martin Fowler and so on, they've said like, oh, when we talk about trunk-based development, we also kind of mean short-lived feature branches, or like very small kind of commit level branches, which are like an hour or a few hours long and not even days. So like when people say trunk based development, they don't just mean trunk based development. And when people talk about branches, they don't just mean very long lived branches. So there is almost, I think the base is actually around inventory and integrating. So keeping inventory in a place, and then you have to integrate that. The larger that is, the bigger the problem. Even if you're doing trunk based development, but then you're releasing every couple of months, you still got a problem, right? Because
Oh,
you're
that's another thing, like release management, right? Like the
Mhm.
whole idea of release trains, you will never go faster than your release train. Doesn't matter what. This is another example of theory of constraints in action, right?
Mhm.
Like if you only put into production every 2 weeks, it doesn't matter how many features you finish.
Oh,
You're
you
not
mean as a
gonna
policy?
you're not gonna release
Yeah.
them in less than 2 weeks. So does it make sense to make the optimizations? Yes, no, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of
Mhm.
the question there, no? Like why do you have to wait for 2 weeks, or a month or whatever, right? And it's usually this is another aspect that also tends to slow things down. Everything related to compliance and security is added at the end, right?
Mhm.
Therefore, when you get there, and it has some reasons to be at the end, by the way. A lot of this stuff, like if you're doing some penetration testing or this kind of stuff, it's expensive to run, so you don't want to be doing it every time, right? But there are aspects of security and compliance that you can shift left as much as possible, right? From training the developers not to introduce SQL injection or cross-site scripting or whatever
Mhm.
you know fault, no, or security flaw into the software that would allow you, to, by the point that you get there, because it's an expensive test or quality gate, you don't want it to fail, right? So you want to do as much as you can before that in order to prevent it from failing, and having to go back. Yeah.
I think it's another thing about that release train is often dependencies between teams, so you can end up waiting for your work relies, and you may have your work might rely on the API of another team, and you may have been able to develop, you've kind of created a mock of that API of some kind, and you've worked against that, but actually waiting for that thing to either have that change ready or be developed entirely, um, that 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 can be a real problem that needs to be sorted.
in
And then you get down to the whole kind of teams being independent and being able to deploy independently. Um,
Which takes us to monolith versus
yeah, that's not.
microservices.
Well,
Like,
actually,
Yeah.
before we go there, there is a bit around release trains that's not just related to software or system dependencies, but rather process and departmental dependencies. So, anyone who's worked in kind of large companies must have heard of the is it acronym CAB, right? Change
Hmm.
Advisory Board,
Oh, yes.
right? So the CAB, it sits every month, once a month or once every 2 weeks, and if you're like maybe a week or 2 weeks early, tough luck, you wait for the CAB to sit, and they will come
Hmm.
and look at your change as well as part of their whole process. So this is an example of a process actually holding things up, and not necessarily a system dependency. And same
Hmm.
can go for people other teams time, because you're not allowed to do this. Only production servicing, and I know in some cases it's necessary, only they're allowed to touch that machine or that environment, so you have to wait until they can get around to you. So there is not just around system, but it's about process, it's about team dependencies, and then of course it's like, as you were mentioning, around system side of things as well.
Mm. And before someone was saying, I think it was Elder saying that a lot of the times blockers are because of trust or lack of trust, and some of this stuff like the cap, no, is because of accountability as well. And it's like someone needs to sign off on
Hmm.
this thing, right?
Mhm.
And so on and so forth. And you need to look at the reason behind some of this, let's put it like this, bottlenecks, no. And once you understand what is the reason, you can then start working around the bottleneck, right?
Mhm.
Like like, oh, we need evidence, we need to be able to trace everything, the functionality all the way to the to when it was deployed, and we need to have accountability for all of that. We need to make sure that nothing gets deployed if all the tests are not passing, and so on,
Hmm.
right? Like you can then, and we need to create logs, and these logs cannot be modified, and like all of that stuff, no. um you can start designing, or let's say using technology to aid you in that process, and then it can, they don't need to sit once a month anymore, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because it's not somebody filling forms, like, because
Hmm.
I've seen the the
Yeah,
process
yeah, yeah.
sometimes it's like
There's often
lots of
call
fields, like, and then what did we change, but you can
they
have
often
a
call it
more
the run book.
streamlined.
Like
Exactly.
the
You
run book is like step by step manual instructions. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in fact, you're right. Of like you would, a lot of these things, if you can create certain systems that have only certain kind of permissions,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and you're automating the pipeline, and you're doing kind of promotion, like build promotions and so on, that cannot be done from other places. So you bake in this kind of compliance within the automation, and not have to have someone kind of standing over you
Mm.
to check for
Yeah,
those things.
or there with the checklist, because they know that it would be impossible to get this far without all those
With
boxes being
Yeah.
all those marks, yeah.
systematic
One
status.
someone is mentioning as well that there is a problem with, let's call it, technical debt, no, like the dealing with the functionalities of the past is also something that reduces the speed.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
there are a few things that can be done around this, right? Like you need to look at why, no, it is slowing you down. Is it because of lack of knowledge of the system, the feature, and so on? So that understanding or shared understanding of the system is something that you can work on. Is it because of the quality of the code? Is it hard to change? Is it is it brittle? No. Is it not tested? Therefore, people are afraid to change it. But it's not that it's hard. It's like, what if I change it and then something breaks, right? Because I have no way of knowing. So if you understand why it is that is becoming a problem, you can start acting on it to speed that up, right?
Hmm.
You can introduce testing, golden master, depending on what the quality of the code is, and so on. You can create your refactoring roadmap, no, so that every time that you need to go back and touch that part of the code, you're evolving it towards your ideal for this, no. And then at some point, it will be easier to change, it will be easier to test, etc., right? And things like this, right? But you need to understand why the previous features or the previous parts of the system that you have to interact with are slowing you down. If you don't do that analysis, it's always going to be there, no.
And there is, I mean, within that, you've got readability as well. So its code is difficult to read and so on. There's a lot of things that are actually connecting to making change easy. There is the whole kind of cognitive load side of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is the um, if you have to understand too much of the code base to understand what a particular feature is doing, that also creates a lot of anxiety, let's say, when you're making change. If, for example, that if that's combined with and sometimes not even combined with lack of tests and those kind of things. The other side of things is, and often we looked at this, is it's not just about the size of the code base, but it's also about how things are happening, right? So often when code is not readable, when it's not directly traceable, so a lot of magic, like global state or those types of things
Mhm.
also cause problems, and you don't know exactly where the change is happening. um, Dependencies that are not clear. So sometimes dependencies on the database from outside processes, that are kind of looking at your implementation, like leaky abstractions, even coupling and cohesion. All these things combined actually make change can make change very difficult if not carefully considered.
You mentioned traceability there, and I think that is one thing that I've seen that people massively underestimate in the kind of the monolith to microservice buzzworld, right? Is how much more difficult it can be if you don't have good traceability as a developer to work out what's going on
Hmm.
when you've got many microservices, and like you can no
Yeah.
longer rely on your IDE to be able to just trace stuff through for you, right? You
You
need
can't
to,
follow through. You
yeah,
can't follow through on your code base.
yeah.
That's also a
Yeah,
big
as soon
problem.
as you have a distributed the system, no, or that's not all in
Uh,
one place, it's gonna be difficult. If something goes wrong, it's gonna be really difficult to find out exactly
or even just to
what.
understand it when you pick it up, when you go to make a change, right?
Hmm.
Because you have to look at perhaps 4 or 5 different code bases to get the context to be able to make
Yeah.
the change that you want to make. It's really a challenge that people underestimate.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are other areas that can slow people down, slow delivery down?
I guess one thing is having the right skills in the team.
Hmm.
So if you need, we all have to learn things as we go sometimes, and especially in our industry. But clearly, it's slower if you're having to learn a technology or a framework or a library before, um, as you write the code.
It's kind of like I often like to call it the kind of the skill versus challenge gap. Like you got
The
whatever challenge
Goldilocks,
that.
the Goldilocks challenge. No, it's not too cold.
Well, you can be too skilled, but you can't. Maybe you can also cause problems when you're too skilled. But yeah, if you don't have the, yeah, if you've got a team of I don't know, like people who starting to do mobile development and no one has any experience of doing that before,
Mhm.
I think that's gonna definitely slow things down. Or even new domains and those kind of things. If you don't have a good understanding of the domain, like it was almost rife within working in the banking sector, and where domain can be very very opaque and difficult. You'd be like, I'd be surprised how many people have spent years doing stuff but just don't really know the full kind of,
Mhm.
don't have a full understanding of the business. They're just relying on the business analyst to kind of tell them do this and do that, and oh yeah, that works and that doesn't work, without kind of truly understanding. And I guess that's also part of the kind of the skill slash knowledge versus challenge gap, right? And can slow
It was
things down.
interesting you said about the mobile development thing as well, right? Because if nobody on the team has got the skills for mobile development, but you pick it up, it happens, right? It happens.
Mhm.
Actually, you're not only affecting your speed now, but probably in the future as well, because you are probably making mistakes, right? You are probably introducing some technical debt, even unknowingly,
Mhm.
or some kind of accidental complexity into the thing that's going to slow you down, in the future as well. So
There,
that's
you touch on another point that I think may be a blocker as well. And we talked about this when we talked about queues and how maybe work is getting piled up in front of, I don't know, QA or something like that. And I think the inflexibility, yeah, of the, let's say, of the workforce, or the capacity, those skills that you have in your team, the the inability of people to be able to move where the bottleneck is and kind of deal with it and sort it out, even if it's not, you're not a specialist, right? In the matter, I think it's something that a lot of times creates all of this stuff that we're talking about, right? So, it's the typical example is the one that I was mentioning before, and it's like things are piling up in QA for whatever reason, and you're a developer, you could probably go and do some of that work as well, on the
Mhm.
automation side and so on and so forth. So in the thing that adds the most value, or let's say to the customer, is it picking up a new story and starting something completely new, or is it finishing something that's already there and that there's a bottleneck and it needs to be addressed, right? And that idea, I think, is quite powerful as well, that workforce flexibility across the whole value stream is something that helps a lot in speeding up delivery. The T-shaped or pie shape professional, no, where you have more than one or more things where you go quite deep, no, but you're able to cover quite a bunch of other things that are
Mhm.
necessary for things to happen, no. And it's not just about technical stuff, it's also about stuff that needs to be done in the project for it to work, no, like refining things, or grooming the backlog, or whatever it is that needs to get done, that is not writing code, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, yeah, when people are too siloed and not working as a team and not helping each other out, yeah, things are sure to slow down.
It's not only collective ownership of the code, because someone is asking, no, are you talking about collective ownership? It's not only collective ownership of the code, yeah,
I
it's
don't think they
ownership
mean
of the
collective ownership.
outcome.
Yeah, because
Is
they just
is
said collective ownership, but do they mean code or do they actually mean collective
Yes.
ownership as in general, like
in
of the
Yeah.
general,
outcome?
that I
Of the
completely agree with,
delivery.
is owning the outcome,
Yeah.
the full thing. This is one of the things that I like about the whole metaphor of the craftsman, no, and the being able to sign your work and understanding every part of the process, right? Be involved in every part of the process. And I think this is something that with economies of scale and engineering in general, it got lost, right? Like you get trained to do one aspect and people usually look at that, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not just what you do, it's all the relationship of what you do with everything else, right? If
Hmm.
you don't
Mhm.
understand that, how do you know that you're doing a
Yeah.
good job, yeah?
And
And
it
so
makes for a great team spirit. It's just more fun, right? If everybody's kind of pitching in and getting the thing, and we're building this thing together, it's a much better spirit within that team.
mhm.
Yeah,
Much
and
better.
more effective.
Yeah.
They have, yeah, as you said, from a spirit, from a teamwork, everything from those point of view, for sure. But meeting expectations, meeting delivery expectations, these things also, right?
Mhm.
It all goes hand in hand. There's one question I think was kind of asked in I think by someone, like, if, because I made a comment around, like, no, not many people understand the banking thing, and said, well, if you knew
Yes.
everything that a bank did, that you'd be a banker. First thing is assuming if you want to be a banker. But the other thing is, actually, what I'm talking about is banking is a very, very wide field. But what I'm talking about is certain kind of sub domains within banking. Like, for example, one of the domains I was working on was over the counter OCT trades, right? And people didn't understand that process. Forget about all the other things, right? Just that particular process that those systems were built on end to end. Most people actually didn't understand. Um, there is a couple of things that I would like to add, and I think maybe worth talking about is, one is cost of failure. That, if the cost of failure is low, then theoretically, because we talked about things going wrong and so on, but sometimes we are afraid to make change because the cost of failure or cost of something going
Mhm.
wrong is extremely high, because
Yeah.
you can't stop you can't stop things going wrong always. But I think it's related to that as well, right?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's both at a kind of team and an individual level, right? Because if as an individual you are the cost of failure, if you mess something up, you're going to be in trouble. Well, the best way to not mess something up is to do very little, right? It's true, isn't it? So if that blame's there, then and if I do this and I mess it up, I'm going to be in trouble. Well, I'm either going to be perhaps over diligent when I'm doing it and kind of gold plate it and etc., or I'm going to not
try not to do it. Exactly. It's like I've literally had these conversations with someone from production services in my kind of past work. Is that every release brings X number of defects. We just release less often, and we reduce the defects immediately.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, one thing, because you mentioned fear, no, because that is also associated with that. No, I'm not going to release because there are consequences, and there's a human aspect to this that I feel is also undervalued, like having people aligned and understanding what the intent is and what it is that you're trying to accomplish and so on and so forth. I think is also quite powerful, right? And before we were saying helping each other, that collaboration aspect. But part of what makes that great is that everyone sees the outcome. Yeah. Like everyone can feel accomplished because we created something. It gives you that, that sense of purpose and accomplishment. No.
Exactly.
And building those things into the culture of your team. No. And building things like continuous improvement or grow and learning mindset, that kind of stuff is also very powerful, and helps with continuously improving that delivery, because you're going to find problems, but not only continuously improving when you know that there are problems. Yeah, I think another way of taking that or tackling that would be to say, okay, if we wanted to do this instead of in 2 weeks, in 1 week, how would it look like? Right? So it's no longer, oh, we found this problem here and it took very long and now we're solving it. No, that's kind of like they continue. Is the whole Kaikagu kind of mentality. It's like we need to reinvent things so that it actually goes faster, not just do small incremental improvements, right? And that is a cultural aspect, right? Like that idea of being able to challenge the status quo and that kind of stuff is culture as well. No, it goes to fear as well, and connected to those things we mentioned before.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So
there is a ton of things to talk about, and I'm sure like I've even got a long list of things but I think we've run out of time. So let's get down to some final thoughts. Who's gonna start? Steve, if you don't know what final thoughts are, basically say a bunch of stuff that you've already said.
Exactly, you summarize or you give some recommendations. So I'll give a recommendation for a book. If you're interested in speeding up software delivery, there's a book called Principles of Product Development Flow, which deals with a lot of this. Is a heavy book, like it's not a.
It's not that
an
big,
easy.
actually. It's about
it's not easy to read. Is what I mean by heavy.
It's about 200 pages, but it's
no, it's a bit more. It's a bit more. It's a bit more, I think. but it touches on a lot of stuff in order to optimize the software development life cycle, and how to know which trade-offs to make and all the things. It talks about the economics of software development as well, and it's pretty interesting if you really want to.
That's the bit that talks about not listening to batch sizes too much, by the way. So you need to go back and read it.
I need to go back there. No. So that would be my recommendation, to go and check it out.
Very good book. Very good book.
Yeah, Mash, you recommended that to me. In fact, it is a good book.
I did a talk on it.
It's hard work.
It is hard work. There are two books. That's called The Principles of Flow, and there's a book called Flow, which is the research on the psychological state. and how the principles of like product development flow and the psychological state flow, they're actually very much in sync.
Right.
It's the idea of that self-similarity, certain concepts, kind of universally applied concepts, often are kind of the most, let's say, true or understandable, or relatable.
So there you go. Those are my final thoughts.
Very good, thank you. And you, Steve?
I think that we spent quite a lot of time talking about the fact that it's not about code, right? But it is about truly working as a team, not as a bunch of individuals. But your team is probably bigger than you think, right? Or it's not the people you sit down with at your group of desks every day or come to your stand up. It's a big thing to get something from the person who had an idea to something out in production, and you need to look at that entire value stream. That's really your team, right? That's the team that's involved in delivering that software, and all parts of that need to work efficiently, and everybody within that needs to work together to make sure that particularly we talked about the kind of handovers and things like that, or handoffs, and the queues, making sure that we're making that whole process as efficient as possible, and everybody's prepared to work at any stage of that.
Thank you, Steve. And from me, I think I'd very much echo both of your points. Flow is a very good book to read, and you have to think things holistically. Start really looking at, and maybe start using some measures we talked about, like lead time and cycle time. There's like part of 4 key metrics, and there are others as well. There's a lot of stuff out there which is around kind of measuring the speed, as it were, and getting the right kind of metrics out so you can actually start identifying those bottlenecks and start working on them. But I think the process for improvement should go hand in hand with your process of software development. So you should always be looking to improve, and a lot of the things that we talked about, and there are many others ways of improving speed of delivery as well. So thank you. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, if you like this, then like on YouTube and subscribe so you know when our next session is. It's usually around the same time every Tuesday, but it'll give you a reminder as well. And join us live so that and ask us questions and participate in the debate. It makes it much richer, as I said. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for having me. I'll see you on the other side next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.